Hello and welcome to this video on managing mood. Now today I'm going to be talking about traps and tracks, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a minute. I thought this was relevant today because we're now 7 weeks into lockdown, and tonight we're waiting for the Prime Minister to tell us what's going to happen next. And many of us will be struggling with our moods, wondering what's going to happen, lots of thoughts and worries creeping in. So I think now's a really good time to do this video. So I hope you get something out of it. Now, a trap is an acronym for trigger, response, and avoidance pattern. Now, the trigger can be any event, so anything that happens at all, whether that's getting a phone call from somebody and having an argument within that phone call, whether that's being told that your job doesn't exist for you anymore, whether that's having some problems at home with the kids, really struggling to give them enough work to do, struggling to manage work and homeschooling. All these things can have an effect on us. So that's the trigger. Our response to that trigger is either our thoughts or our feelings that we have as a result of that trigger event. And then avoidance pattern covers our behaviour. So this is the behaviour that results from those thoughts and feelings in response to that event. Now, if our trigger event is, for example, one of our children wanting to do the work that's been set for them by school, refusing to do it, or maybe having a bit of a meltdown, shouting about it, saying they're not going to do it, and maybe having a go at us because they're so irritated and cross, then that can result in us feeling really hopeless, deflated, defeated. It can lead us to have thoughts such as, I'm a bad parent, I should be able to do this, I need to keep everybody going, I need to hold everything together. Other feelings might be frustration, maybe anger, and the list could go on. Now, what we might find is we then fall into an avoidance pattern because it's so difficult for us to manage these frustrations of our children, and we're having all these thoughts and feelings about being a bad parent and feeling like we have to manage things well, then this can lead us to potentially avoiding these kind of situations. So, okay, so I'm not going to do it at all. I'm not even going to set the homework tasks for my child. I'm not going to ask them to do it. There's no point because I'm a bad parent anyway and it will never work out, these kind of things. So we fall into that trap of doing nothing, and then that stops us from being able to do the things which would be quite useful in the situation. So then we need to look at the consequences of this avoidance pattern. And we can split the consequences up into short-term and long-term. So what are the short-term consequences firstly? So with this particular trigger event and avoidance behaviour, the consequences of that are relief, no further arguments with your child, not having to think about it anymore, out of sight, out of mind, and actually one less thing to think about when we're trying to hold everything else together. So some really nice short-term consequences there, which kind of keep the behaviour going. That avoidance pattern is more likely to continue because of those short-term consequences. But what about the long-term consequences? So the long-term consequences of this might be that no work actually gets done. The child spends more time on other internet sites. We start to feel bad because of these things that I've just mentioned. Maybe we start to have thoughts, I really am a bad parent, I'm not doing anything. And there's a possibility that child may fall behind. So looking at the consequences, how does this make us feel? Now, if we look at the consequences and we say to ourselves, well, okay, we may have these long-term consequences, but actually, at the moment, it really doesn't matter because I've got enough on my plate and I need to manage the situation as best I can, then that's okay. However, if you're looking at the long-term consequences and that makes you feel really bad and it affects your mood, then that is identified then as more of a trap for you because of the impact on your mood. And that's the point at which we have to think about doing things differently. And this is where tracks come in. So TRACK is also an acronym, and it stands for Trigger, Response and Alternative Coping. And again, we've got the same trigger, the event, the response being the thoughts and the feelings to that event, and the alternative coping being an alternative behaviour than the original avoidance patterns. So let's have a look at avoidance patterns versus alternative coping methods. So avoidance patterns might be to give up, enforce no work, don't even mention the work for fear of an argument, don't think about it and push it away every time it comes into your mind. Okay, so your alternative coping strategies might be, rather than giving up, to find an appropriate time to talk about it. Rather than enforcing no work, agree a balance, maybe set some guidelines together, agree what's possible. Rather than not mentioning the work for fear of an argument, approach the subject with understanding. It's really difficult for our children right now, but if we offer them that understanding, then we're showing them that we're on their level, we're on their side, we know how difficult it is for them, and actually we start to feel better that we're approaching things in a more helpful way. And rather than not thinking about the subject at all, because it's too difficult, consider our options and maybe start to put a plan together for how we're going to deal with this. So what's the effect then of using these alternative coping methods rather than falling into the avoidance patterns? Well, the impact is on our mood. So because we're actually trying to do something rather than avoiding, we start to give ourselves an opportunity for achievement. We start to feel helpful rather than helpless. And we no longer keep ourselves stuck in the situation, trying to avoid something that actually won't go away and keeps coming back into our heads, however much we try not to think about it. So just to help illustrate this, I'm going to run through my day as it was yesterday. So here goes. As you can see, I've split it up into time frames. So 8 till 9, shopping. And next to shopping, I've got a pleasure rating and an achievement rating. And these are really important when we're looking for traps in our daily schedule. So on Saturday, my pleasure rating with shopping was 2 out of 10. I don't like shopping at the best of times, so the pleasure rating is never going to be high. But you'll notice that the achievement rating was actually 0. Now what happened is I went shopping and there was such an enormous queue when I got there, because everybody obviously had the same idea to go early, that I actually had to turn around and come back again because I didn't have time to do the shopping that I needed to do. So this obviously affected my sense of achievement, and it also affected my mood. It made me feel really down that I hadn't been able to get some shopping in the hour that I had before I had to work. So having identified this as a bit of a trigger for myself, not being able to do the things that I need to do when I choose to do them actually makes me feel quite down. On reflection, I decided not to try that again and actually identify a time when the shopping is going to be easier and try and do it then, rather than insist on going first thing in the morning on a Saturday when everybody's having the same idea. So if I was going to get stuck in a trap, I would keep doing the same thing, or I would avoid going shopping altogether because it's just too difficult and I'm never going to have enough time to do it, and everybody's going to be there at the same time. There's going to be a huge queue. There's just no point. However, my alternative coping mechanism, having reflected on it, was decided that I'm going to go at a different time, and I'll try lots of different times, and I'll figure out eventually which one is going to be the best for me. So I didn't give up, although I felt like it. I thought about the other options, and actually that's what I'm going to do. So I freed myself from that trap. Now with the next one, from 9 till 10, I had to work. I had to put an hour of work in. Now, for obvious reasons, my pleasure rating's not going to be very high here, because although I enjoy what I do, not many people enjoy working at the weekend. So having to work at the weekend, even only for an hour, made my pleasure rating only a 4 out of 10. However, there'd been something that I'd been trying to work out for a while around work, And actually I managed to do this in that hour. So my achievement rating, therefore, was quite high at 9 out of 10. So what does this tell me in terms of traps? Well, obviously working at the weekend isn't something that's going to make me very happy, so I need to be aware of that. However, the fact that I was able to have an opportunity to achieve increased my mood because my achievement rating was so high. So if we can get a good balance between pleasure and achievement, they don't both have to be really high, but we have to have some kind of balance between them. So what about the next one then? Between 11 and 12 yesterday, I was sorting a computer program out. I downloaded something and I wanted to try and get it to run on the computer, and I'd had some problems the day before. Now my pleasure with this was only 1 out of 10, because I don't like doing stuff like this. I feel a lot of frustration when I'm trying to do things on the computer, and I don't really have the patience for it. However, I had the time and I persevered and I managed it. So my achievement levels at the end of that were actually really high at 10 out of 10. Now, the day before, my pleasure and achievement wouldn't have been the same. Well, my pleasure may have been. My pleasure would have still been about 1 out of 10. But when I tried to do this the day before, my achievement levels were actually nothing, because I was trying to cook dinner at the same time as sorting the program out. It wasn't a good time to do it. I had lots of other people making demands of me at the same time, and I didn't have the thinking space that I needed. So it was a really bad time to be trying to sort a computer program out. So there's something about when you put things in your day and whether that activity is a good activity to put at that time. So the fact that I tried to do that the day before when there was so much else going on wasn't a good idea, and it actually made my mood drop. But because I had the space on Saturday between 11 and 12 to do it, it was a good time to try and put this in, and it gave me the opportunity then to achieve, and my mood was boosted as a result. Now the next thing on my schedule for Saturday, cleaning the guinea pigs and doing some gardening. Now you'll notice here that my pleasure and achievement ratings are really high. I enjoy taking care of the animals. It gives me a lot of pleasure. I like doing things for them. I like to make them more comfortable. And actually the gardening was something that I'd been meaning to do for a long time, and I managed to set the time aside and do what I wanted to do. So again, I was able to have really high achievement rating there, and I enjoyed it because the sun was shining. So it's really important to get a balance in our day of different kinds of activities. So you'll see that so far in my schedule for Saturday, I've had a couple of demands, and also I've had some pleasurable activities, as well as things that I've had to sort out, and I've managed to. So I've had opportunities for achievement, and I've had opportunities for pleasure, as well as some not so nice tasks. And as long as you get a balance, generally your mood can cope. It's when we don't have a balance and we have too much of one thing that things can start to get difficult. So next on Saturday between 2 and 4 I had work and home demands. So there were some more bits that I had to do around work, some emails that I had to get sent out, some reports that I had to finish off. And at the same time I also had things going on at that time, such as thinking about preparing dinner, sorting things out for the kids, and actually trying to do all those things together meant that my pleasure and achievement ratings were quite low. So usually doing things at home that need doing can mean that my pleasure ratings can be reasonably high because I enjoy sorting things out. However, the fact that there was so much going on at the same time meant that my pleasure was reduced, and actually my opportunity for achievement was very low because there was too much going on. So that's something to watch out for. Between 5 and 7 I had some family time with no conflicting demands. Now this meant that my pleasure rating was 10 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed having that family time. I thoroughly enjoyed not having anything else that I needed to do at that point in time. My achievement rating wasn't really high, it was only 5 out of 10. But do we have to achieve something all of the time? Maybe not. So actually, with my pleasure being so high, you could say that's an achievement in itself, but the fact that I've only rated 5 out of 10 for my achievement doesn't matter, because I've still got a good balance. And the last one I've got on here is between 8 and 9, kids' bedtimes, reading, getting ready for bed, all the other bits and pieces that need to be done before the kids can go to bed. So my pleasure rating here is 5 out of 10. You know, stuff that you've got to do that sometimes can be really pleasurable, other times not so much. Last night was obviously somewhere in the middle. And the achievement rating I've only given 6 out of 10, which is reasonably low, because although I got it all done, it was a bit of a rush. It was quite chaotic, and the reason for that was because I wasn't particularly organised. So because we'd had that lovely family time with no conflicting demands until 7, I was then quite late getting organised for bedtimes and all the other things that I needed to do to go with that. So that caused me a certain level of stress and meant that my achievement levels were lower and that my pleasure rating was lower, as I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have done had I been a bit more organised. So looking at that and identifying that as a bit of a trap, that means that next time I have the opportunity to do something different. So if I was going to employ an alternative coping mechanism next time, rather than get myself into a trap and avoid doing bedtimes altogether or avoid doing reading altogether at bedtime, what I would then do is decide to organise things slightly earlier, maybe put the reading in at the end of the family time so that that's part of the nice time, and then between 8 and 9 we're just doing teeth brushing, bedclothes and into bed, which should make the whole process a lot easier, not impact on my mood so much, and leave me feeling like I've achieved to a higher level and feeling like I've got a lot more pleasure out of the whole bedtime routine. So you can see then how important it is to get a balance with the things that you're doing in each day, to make sure that you've got enough opportunities for pleasure and achievement, and to be able to look at your day and reflect on it and pick out the points where your mood's been lower and pick out the reasons why. Because once we've done that and identified these potential traps, these places where our mood has a tendency to go down and we feel like we haven't achieved as well as we could have done, then we can start to do things differently, and that's where the tracks come in. So what should we have in our daily schedule to enable us to achieve that balance? Well, let's have a look. Generally speaking, these are the kind of things that we need to have within our schedule, and we need to achieve some kind of balance between them. So although what I've drawn here gives them roughly the same proportion of the circle each, this might not be the case, and we may have to shift this a little bit, but that's okay. So roughly, work, demands, self-care, leisure, social time and rest are taking up the same proportions within this circle. And these are the things that we need to make sure that we have in our day. Now within leisure we might have exercise time, time outdoors. Self-care is often really tiny in people's circles, and it's really important to make sure that we do attend to ourselves and give ourselves that time, whether that's self-care, doing something nice for ourselves in a pampering sense, having a nice hot bath, doing a face mask, nails, maybe doing a workout. Maybe that is self-care for you. Depends what kind of things fit into your idea of self-care. Demands are the things that other people want or need us to do. So childcare, things to do with our children if we've got children, looking after other people if we've got responsibilities towards older parents or relatives. Work obviously often takes up a big proportion of our time. That might not be the case right now while we're in this situation with the coronavirus. However, if it is, it's important to make sure that you get a good balance between work and everything else that you've got to do in your day. Rest, vitally important. We all need our rest. So rest can include sleep and also quiet times for perhaps mindfulness or meditation, or even just sitting alone and getting some space. Social, really important to stay in contact with friends and family. So making sure that you carve that time out for yourself and don't put your social needs to one side just because you're looking after everybody else's needs. So I hope you found that helpful. So to summarise, traps are things that happen as a result of a trigger event, and our responses in terms of our thoughts and our feelings leading us into avoidant patterns of behaviour. Our activity or an absence of activity leads us to having low pleasure and low achievement ratings, which in turn impacts our mood and can cause more avoidance patterns. And in turn, those avoidance patterns can impact our mood even more and keep the cycle going. So then we turn to tracks to help us. So tracks are the alternative coping behaviours that we need to use in response to the trigger and our response in terms of our thoughts and feelings. And what they do is they combat the traps. So they release us from our traps. They release us from the avoidant behaviour patterns that we're using and give us an opportunity to achieve, give us an opportunity for increased pleasure, and allow us to feel unstuck and track our way out of that negative cycle, so that we can start then perhaps planning our days to include those things that give us more opportunities for high achievement and high pleasure. So I hope all that makes sense to you, and I hope you've got something out of that. If you've got any questions about it, please just contact me, write some comments underneath, and I'd be really happy to get back to you and answer your questions for you. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care till then. Bye bye.